I'd like to open the public meeting. And the first item on the agenda is roll call.
Lendl Story,
Here.
Steve Abel, Ken Fuller,
Here.
Jody Moses,
Here.
Daniel Young,
Present.
Brent Cole,
Here.
Amy McKenzie,
Here.
Anthony Cange,
Present.
excuse me, Trevor Edmondson,
Here.
and then you have
Thank you. First, I would like to acknowledge that we have two new members on the board, Anthony Cange and Trevor Edmondson. Thank you for volunteering to serve on this board. Thank you both. The next item on the agenda is approval of action summaries. May I have a motion to approve, a positive motion to approve these, please? Mr. Story moved to approve, and Jody Moses seconded it. Would you speak to your motion, please, Mr. Story? Excuse me, are there any corrections to the action summaries? Are there any objections to these action summaries? Hearing no objections, these action summaries are approved. The next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. May I have a positive motion to approve the minutes for September 7th, 2011? Mr. Cole moved to approve. Is there a second? Mr. Story, second. Is there any discussion or corrections about the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the minutes are approved. Special orders of business. The first order is disclosures. Are there any disclosures tonight? Mr. Story?
Yes, in the case S11892-1, Port of Anchorage Subdivision, Tracks Q and Y, I would like to disclose that my firm, R&M Consultants, is under contract with the Port of Anchorage, and Mr. Hale, who is employed by R&M Consultants, is representing the petitioner tonight. I do have substantial professional and financial involvement in the case, and therefore I would like to recuse myself from participating.
Thank you. May I have a positive motion to direct Mr. Story to participate tonight, please? Ms. McKenzie is the mover, and Ms. Moses seconds. Would you speak to your motion, please?
I intend to vote against my positive motion. Mr. Story has explained that he has a conflict of interest in this matter and intends to recuse himself.
Is there any other discussion on this matter? Vote. In that case, we'll vote. A positive vote would direct Mr. Story to participate, and a negative vote would direct him not to participate. Mr. Story is recused from the case, the second case. Thank you. The next order of business on the election is the election of the interim chair. Are there any nominations for chair? Mr. Story?
I would like to nominate Daniel Young for interim chair.
Thank you. Are there any, and that's seconded by Ms. McKenzie. Are there any other nominations for chair? Are there any objections? Hearing none, I'm the chair, the interim chair. Yes. It's been brought to my attention that now we do not have a vice chair. So let's open nominations for the vice chair. Is there anybody who would, Ms. Moses?
I nominate Lynn Story for the position of vice chair.
Is there a second for this motion? Mr. Fuller seconds. Is there any other nominations for vice chair? Are there any objections to Mr. Story becoming the vice chair? There are no objections. Mr. Story, congratulations. You're now the vice chair. We have no items on the consent agenda tonight. We have no old business tonight, and so we are going to move into new business. And the first case is Palos Verdes subdivision. The procedures by which the public may speak to the Platting Board at this meeting is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Platting Board rules of procedures. Petitioners, including his or her representatives, have 10 minutes. Rebuttal by the petitioner may be allowed when time has been reserved. Representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., are allowed 5 minutes, and individuals are allowed 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the board. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the board. Any individual may have appeal rights relating to action of the Platting Board. Appeals of this decision or any of the conditions is governed by AMC Title 21.11.304. The decision of the board at the scheduled public hearing shall become final 7 calendar days after the date of the decision is made on the record, unless a written request is submitted to the Department of Community Development Planning Division prior to the expiration of the 7th day to prepare a written decision based on record made at the hearing, and the request is accompanied by a written notice of intent to appeal. Adoption of the written decision by the Platting Board members or by the Platting Board becomes the final appealable decision. Within 20 days of the final appealable decision, an interested party must file with the municipal clerk either a written motion alleging new evidence or changed circumstances per AMC Title 21.11.503, or an appeal of the board's final appealable decision per AMC 21.30. We'll now begin with the case Palos Verdes subdivision, case S11893-1. And we'll have staff's presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request to vacate a 20-foot stream maintenance easement that runs along the east and north property boundaries of Lot 5, Block 2, Palos Verdes subdivision. This request is a result of an encroachment of a single-family home into that easement. At one time, a tributary of Meadow Creek ran across the properties within Block 2 of Palos Verdes subdivision. Sometime in the 1990s, that tributary was captured in a storm drain system along Chain of Rock Drive and emptied into Meadow Creek along the northern property boundaries of Block 1, Palos Verdes subdivision. This vacation request has been reviewed by staff and found to conform to the municipal vacation policy. All reviewing agencies had either no comment or had no objection to this request. And with that said, the department would like to recommend approval of the request to vacate this 20-foot stream maintenance easement running along the east and north property boundary of Lot 5, Block 2, Palos Verdes subdivision, subject to one condition located on page 4 of your staff packet. Thank you.
Are there any questions of staff? Hearing no questions, then we will open the public hearing. The presenter, please proceed and provide us your name and spell your name for us, please.
Good evening. I am Wendy. Actually, it's a middle initial B, Anderson, Anderson. That's Wendy, Wendy. I don't know if you needed the first name too or not. I'm the owner of the property at 17528 Meadow Creek Drive, and I can just fill in a little more details to the staff report. I bought the property in 2002 with no problems, and in June of this past summer, I listed the house for sale, had an immediate offer, and we were due to close the sale on August 8th. I had vacated the premise, and I was consolidating households, so I got rid of most of my belongings as well. On August 5th, we were notified by the mortgage company that we couldn't close the sale on the property because the house encroached into a stream maintenance easement that was on the property. The buyer was seeking FHA financing, and FHA wouldn't finance with the encroachment in place. In trying to solve the problem, we obtained a letter from the city basically stating what the staff has reported, that there was a tributary on the property, and the city had captured the tributary at the street above, run it through a storm drain, and it now dumps into the main Meadow Creek, which is across the street from my property. So that tributary no longer runs across the property. The letter from the city stated that the easement's no longer needed for its original purpose, and we had that signed off by the head of the planning department, I believe. Anyway, we presented the letter to FHA. They found it not acceptable. They would not finance the sale of the property. So the buyer backed out of that. And that's the reason why I've applied to have the easement vacated. It's shown in the staff report and many of the other commenters that there's no longer a stream on the property, and the easement isn't needed. And I am convinced that I will not be able to sell my property unless the easement's vacated. So I ask that you please follow the recommendation of staff. And I might note, too, I have complied with all the conditions listed in the staff recommendation. There was another structure on the property that was determined to be too close to the house, and I have had that structure removed and provided staff with a before and after picture. So I'm willing to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you. You have 7 minutes and 19 seconds left for rebuttal.
Okay.
Are there any questions for the petitioner? No questions, so we'll open this up to public comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify tonight? Seeing none, would you care to use any of your rebuttal time? Thank you. There's no one to testify from the public tonight in this matter, so we're going to close the public hearing, and the matter will rest with the board. Are there any questions for staff or any discussion? Mr. Cole has made a motion to approve. Mr. Cole, would you articulate your proposal?
In the case of S11893-1 Palos Verdes subdivision, my motion is to vacate vacation of the 20-foot stream maintenance easement located on the eastern and northern boundary of the property listed.
Thank you. And Mr. Fuller seconded it. Would you? Yes, Mr. Cole, do you want to make your motion subject to the conditions on page 4?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Fuller, do you continue to second that? Thank you. Mr. Fuller is nodding his head in a positive manner. Will you speak to Mr. Cole, will you speak to your motion, please?
Yes. In this case, it appears to me that the burden of the petitioner, which must be met under the municipal ordinance, has been met. It does not appear that there are any objections, and that there is no further value to the easement at this time, and that's based on the testimony that is contained in the package that we've received, and it's consistent with the recommendations of the staff, and so I intend to vote for it because of the evidence that's been presented.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Any other questions for staff? Are there any objections to this motion? Hearing none, this motion passes. Thank you. Mr. Story, would you please recuse yourself for this next hearing? Thank you. The next matter before the board is case S11892-1, Port of Anchorage Subdivision, Edition Number 2. May we have staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a subdivision of 2 tracts of land into 1 different tract of land for proposed Tract J, Port of Anchorage Subdivision, Edition Number 2. The platted area contains 48 acres and is a re-subdivision of Tracts Q and Y, Port of Anchorage Subdivision, per Record of Survey 2007-87. Tracts Q and Y were deeded to the Port of Anchorage by the United States Army by quitclaim deed. The purpose of this plat is to combine Tracts Q and Y, creating Tract J, Port of Anchorage Subdivision, Edition Number 2. Flood hazard review notes that there are portions of this petition site that are located in the floodplain. Private development notes that both Terminal Road and Anchorage Port Road appear to be constructed to municipal standards and are requiring no improvements at this time. The traffic engineer is requesting that direct heavy-duty vehicular access to East Bluff Drive be prohibited. The wetlands coordinator requires a note on the plat stating that there are waters of the U.S. within the platted boundaries that are under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Regulatory Division. Other than that, no things to note. I would like to recommend, or the department would like to recommend approval of the plat, subject to conditions 1 through 5 on pages 6, 7, and 8 of your staff packet. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Seeing none, we're going to open the public hearing. Would the petitioner please approach the podium? Would you like to reserve any time for rebuttal?
Yes, please.
How much time would you like to reserve?
Whatever's left.
Okay, well, you're entitled to that.
I'm Dave Hale with R&M Consultants. We're representing the petitioner of the Port of Anchorage. Mr. Steve Rebuffo is with me from the port, and could give some historical background if needed. I think the staff has summarized it fairly well, so we have no objection to any of the recommendations as laid out here. So if you guys have any questions, we'll stand by and reserve whatever time we have left.
Thank you. You have 9 minutes and 37 seconds left for rebuttal. Are there any questions of the petitioner? Mr. Edmondson, you have a question?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'll start over.
Okay.
Mr. Hale, on page 23 of the staff packet, appears to be a plat of track Q and track Y that shows a railroad siting and access easement on the property. What's the current status of that easement?
I don't know that easement actually exists. This is a record of survey shown on 23. It actually doesn't dedicate any easements.
Okay.
The easements you see here they're put on there for informational purposes from the best available information that they had. I don't have any information on this railroad easement. I took it off our plat because I don't have any documents that dedicate that easement, but I've discussed it with staff at the planning department, and we're going to work with the railroad to make sure that their interests are protected. And I believe that staff is going to add that as a requirement in the conditions that we resolve the need for an easement covering that.
Are there currently tracks on the property?
There are. There are tracks within the Port of Anchorage that are considered private, and the maintenance of those tracks is more the issue. So that's what we need to discuss with the railroad, and the Port of Anchorage guys will sort out with them if that's going to be a private track that needs to be maintained by the port, or if it is going to be maintained by the railroad, then they would probably want an easement. So we'll have to discuss that with the railroad, take the findings back to staff and the planning department, and come to some conclusion on whether an easement's actually needed or not.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of the petitioner? Seeing none, the public is invited to testify. Is there anybody in the public wishing to testify? Seeing nobody in the public to testify, would you care to use any of your rebuttal time? The petitioner signals negative, so we're going to close the public hearing. Or is there any discussion or questions? Oh, excuse me. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, to the board, I do apologize. During my presentation, I did not add the one condition in regards to the railroad easement. I would like to add that as a condition of approval, and I'll quote it for you if you don't mind. Resolving the need with the Alaska Railroad for the access easement. I'd like to make it a resolve comment so that the railroad has a discretion to put the easement on there or to remove it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Are there any discussion? May I have a positive motion? Oh, the public, I did. The public hearing is closed. Thank you. Okay. Are there, I would like to have a positive motion, and Ms. Moses, to approve, and Ms. Moses makes that motion. Would you tell us your motion, please?
In the case of S-11892-1, Port of Anchorage subdivision tracts Q and Y, for the subdivision of 2 tracts of land into 1 tract of land, I move to approve subject to conditions 1 through 6, with the addition of condition 6 reading, resolving the need with Alaska Railroad for restart that. Resolving with Alaska Railroad the need for a railroad easement. And those conditions are found on pages 6 through 8 of the packet, with the addition of condition 6.
Thank you. And Mr. Cole seconds. Ms. Moses, would you speak to your motion, please?
I intend to support the motion. This approval presents that it meets the criteria for subdivision.
Thank you. Is there any discussion about this motion? Are there any objections to this motion? Mr. Edmondson.
Actually, I have an additional question of staff. Okay.
Go ahead.
Would we typically ask the railroad for comments in regards to these platting actions?
To the chair, Mr. Edmondson, I don't believe that the railroad is on our routing. However, in this particular case, we should have routed it to the railroad. I'm not sure if that actually happened in this case. However, I do believe that the additional condition is warranted, and Mr. Hale has certainly agreed to work it out with the railroad. But not typically, no.
Okay, so I'm assuming we didn't get any comments back from them in regards to this then?
Through the chair, Mr. Edmondson, no, we did not get any comments from the railroad. Had we got comments, I certainly would have included them in my staff packet. So no, we did not.
Are there any other questions or discussion? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, seeing none, the motion passes. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a parent's request, and there is none listed. Persons to be heard. Are there any persons to be heard tonight? None. There are no reports scheduled for tonight. Are there any board member comments? Hearing none and seeing none, I would accept a positive motion for adjournment. Ms. Moses moves to adjourn, and Mr. Story seconds. Any objection? Meeting is closed.